Okay, we are recording. So let's start on page 121. Just pick up the last couple of lines there so we have a good place to start. We are in the chapter called A Bright Sadness. And for those of you who don't remember or may not be with us, we sort of defined this concept of a bright sadness as the conviction of a purpose in the sadness. Okay, so the sadness is bright because it has a purpose, it has a reason, and it's taking us someplace. So he said on page 117, our mature years are characterized by a kind of bright sadness and a sober happiness. And the sober happiness we talked about is understanding the limits of happiness, understanding the limits of what we can control and our circumstances that we can control, that sort of thing. But that even in the difficult times, there's a purpose, which is the brightness. That's the kind of the closest that we came to really putting a pin in what he's talking about here with this concept of the bright sadness. So at the bottom of page 121, and as we talked about, he is wrapping this up. He's starting to just paint the picture of the second half of life person. And so that's what's going on in this chapter. Actually, in the last full paragraph on page 121, he's talking about these people that Erik Erikson sometimes calls a generative person who is eager and able to generate life from his or her own abundance. He says their God is no longer small, punitive, or tribal. They once worshiped their raft. That would be the delivery system. For Odysseus, it would be the oar, right? For us, it would be whatever we have accumulated in our life that we rely on for survival, whether it's our job, our looks, our talent, our family. So we once worshipped that raft. They now love the shore where it has taken them. They once defended signposts. Now they've arrived where the signpost pointed. They now enjoy the moon instead of fighting over whose finger points to it most accurately, quickly, or definitively. One's growing sense of infinity and spaciousness is no longer found just out there, but most especially in here. The inner and outer have become one. You can trust your inner experience now because even God has allowed it, used it, received it, and refined it. As St. Augustine dramatically put it in his Confessions, you were within, but I was without. You were with me, but I was not with you. So you called, you shouted, you broke through my deafness, you flared, blazed, and banished my blindness. You lavished your fragrance, and I gasped. And we talked about that last week as, is it always that dramatic, for all of us? Do we really experience it with that kind of, ecstatic experience, with that kind of intensity? And we said, no, not all of us do. I know I didn't. Sometimes it's still quiet. Sometimes it's more of a slow incline, maybe punctuated with some peak moments, but not necessarily a crazily intense moment or turn of events like this. And so I don't know how you have all experienced your growing connection with God, if you've had these kind of moments or not. I've had some breakthroughs. I could say I've had some apostrophes or epiphanies, if you will. But but at any rate, everybody is going to experience this differently. But the only thing I didn't want to leave you with is that it's supposed to look like this so that you're waiting for this to happen, because maybe it may not. Okay, continuing on. It takes such gasping several times in your life to eventually rest in a bright sadness. You are sad because you now hold the pain of the larger world, and you wish everyone enjoyed what you now enjoy. But there is brightness because life is somehow, on some levels, still very good, just as Genesis promised. Merton says this best, as he concludes my favorite book of his. It does not matter much now, because no despair of ours can alter the reality of things or stain the joy of the cosmic dance, which is always there. We are now invited to forget ourselves on purpose, cast our awful solemnity to the winds, and join in the general dance. I think I just read this passage last Sunday, as a matter of fact. The famous passage of the general dance And if you're wondering what his favorite book is, it's New Seeds of Contemplation, if you're interested in picking that one up. That's the one that this comes from. In the second half of life, we do not have strong and final opinions about everything. That's a good line, right? In the second half of life, we do not have strong and final opinions about everything, every event, or most people, as much as we allow things and people to delight us, sadden us, and truly influence us. We no longer need to change or adjust other people to be happy ourselves. Ironically, we are more than ever before in a position to change people, but we don't need to. I love that. And that makes all the difference. That's huge. We are more than ever in a position to change people, but we don't need to. And that makes all the difference. In other words, the ego no longer requires us to change people to our way of thinking. We have grown out of that stage 2 place of spiritual growth that we've talked about before, where it's groupthink, and we need to defend the groupthink, and we can't tolerate anyone thinking other than we do. In other words, we're no longer fear-based. We don't fear someone who doesn't think or believe what we think or believe. We don't need to change them and try to create them into mini-me's. They don't have to think like us. And so we can actually allow people to be free to follow their own path, to believe what they believe and not feel threatened by that. It's a huge, huge difference, huge change. We have moved from doing to being to an utterly new kind of doing that flows almost organically, quietly, and by osmosis. Our actions are less compulsive. We do what we are called to do and then try to let go of the consequences. We usually cannot do that very well when we are young. I like that line. We do what we are called to do and then try to let go of the consequences. What do you think he's talking about there in terms of consequences? We do what we are called to do and then try to let go of the consequences.
Not everybody would like what one is saying.
No, I don't think that's where he's going, dear. He's talking about us doing what we're called to do, but then letting go of the consequences.
Reminds me of that saying that I've quoted a couple times here that I heard at a weekend seminar. People don't break our hearts, they break our expectations. And what I mean by that is that when I'm reading this, we do what we're called to do and then try to let go of the consequences. We usually cannot do that very well when we're young. When we're young, we have an expectation and we can't let go of it, but it needs to be this way. But you said, Dad, we're going to Disneyland, but this, but that. We come to count on those things. And as we get older, we learn to ebb and flow with the tide a little bit for a lot smoother ride. This is my experience.
Okay. That sounded more like we're doing what we're told to do. Is that the way you're reading this?
No.
Okay.
We do what we're called to do and then try to let go of the consequences. So
what are the consequences? So you do the consequences are...
It could be varied because it depends on what we're being called to do. I mean, there's thousands of subjects. There's thousands of answers to that. I'm not trying to avoid you. I just don't know how to answer it.
Well, what do you mean by called to? I mean, where does that start and who's calling you?
See, to me, what he's talking about here is that we don't need to, the ego in us does not any longer require us to go out and do things compulsively, to find things to do, to prove our worth, to prove ourselves to ourselves or to anybody else. We just do the things that we're called to do. I so admire George Washington because he was called to lead the Continental Army, and reluctantly he did. And he did it as well as he could. He was successful. And at the end of it, he resigned his commission. He was done with it. And then he had to be pulled kicking and screaming back to the presidency because he didn't want to do that either. And he served 2 terms and then he stepped down, setting the precedent for a 2-term presidency all the way until FDR in the 40s. who won 4 terms, and then we put in term limits, but to do what you're called to do means you don't need to do it. Your ego isn't compulsively jerking you to do it. It's something that you're called to do. And then you accept the consequences, which to me would be success or failure. Either you succeed at what you're doing or you fail at it, but it doesn't define you anymore, because the doing of the task didn't define you. It's something that you're called to do, and you do it as well as you can for the benefit of those around you. But it's a whole different way of doing. The doing of the first half of life, our identity is tied up with that doing. But when we get through from the doing to the being back to the doing of the second half of life, we're still doing, but now our identity is not tied up with it anymore. And so it's a whole different feel to the thing. And that's why I think he says you can't do that very, very well when you're young, because when you're young, all of your identity is tied up in your performance. That make a sense?
Yeah, yeah, it surprised me a little bit, because it sounds like how you read it, Dave, is that like when we're in our ego, we are compulsive oftentimes in trying to prove something to ourselves or to others or something like that. But we do what we are called to do. From your perspective, is that we may be called by other humans, in the case of George Washington, to do something for a larger scope of people, to serve a leadership role when there is a vacuum of leaders. And we do it without having anything to prove to ourselves or to others, and we do our best to try to succeed in terms of accomplishing the goals that are being defined as good, supposedly. And whether we are approved in the way that we do that or not, those are the consequences, and we're neither jubilant about it or felled by the disapproval, so to speak. Is that what you're pretty much saying?
Yeah. Although, we can take a lot of satisfaction in the successes, and maybe we can be hurt by the failures of the outcome of what we're trying to do, but it's not going to derail us. It's because our identity is not tied up in it. It's not who we are, it's what we do. Obviously, we're going to work hard and we're going to try to succeed at whatever we're called to do. And when called to do, it doesn't need to be something spectacular. It's just like, I don't know, at this stage in our life, Marion was called to go back and get a job again and work after 20 some years being a homemaker, a stay-at-home mom, and homeschooling the kids and all of that. It's not something she wanted to do, but our finances needed it. And so she's called to do it, and she's doing the best she can with it. But her ego is not tied up in being a cashier at Albertsons at this point in her life. So it can be something simple, it can be something large, whatever it is.
But couldn't it be at a smaller scale, somewhat along the lines of what Linda was saying, and that maybe what we are called to do, we perceive, is being asked and led by our spiritual relationship with what God's will is for us in relationship to our family or our loved ones. I think of people that I've talked to recently who are really struggling with a child who is an adult child, who is way an adult, like 50 years old adult, and they are going to their third rehab. They're just, the mom is still struggling with the Thanksgiving piece of this whole time that we're in. And she had plans, and her daughter was being released from rehab, and she was because she's had a suicide in her own family, she's lost a son already from the disease. She was, I think, in fear about leaving her daughter by herself on Thanksgiving. And she was struggling with what should I do? What am I being called to do by God? If I decide to give up my plans and go spend the day with her, is she acting out of her ego or her fears? I don't know. But is she able to go and perhaps do what, quote unquote, Al-Anon tells us to do? It's like, kind of engage, love on her, bring her back to her own home, and perhaps help her feel more safe there while she takes the time that she very much needs with her own family, extended family.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think it can be all of the above, anything. But let's go back a few lines, just see if this makes more sense now. He says at the top of the page, ironically, we are more than ever before in a position to change people, but we don't need to. And that makes all the difference. We've moved from doing to being, to an utterly new kind of doing that flows almost organically, quietly, and by osmosis. Our actions are less compulsive. We do what we're called to do and then try to let go of the circumstances. So it's more of a Wei Wu kind of thing, do not do. The Chinese idea that you do by not doing, that you are part of the flow, but you're not trying to be, in any way, this imperial force that is trying to make something happen or needs to make something happen. But you can be part of the flow that is the happening. And so it's experienced very differently. And I think that's the key, to being in the second half of life, that the doing that we do is something that's more a part of a flow. And we find a way to just be able to be part of that without getting identified with the outcomes, with the consequences. At least that's the way I'm reading it. But it can be the small things. It can be something like you're talking about, an interpersonal thing, or a decision within a family, or it can be a job or a career, or really anything else that we're tasked with. But how do we approach? How tied are we to it?
Yeah, I'm thinking though that Judy's example there of like a mother trying to take care of her kid who is struggling with addiction, like that's not so much of an ego-driven thing. I think it's more like that's just what a mother would do in that situation, and and she would always be attached to the outcome, like any good parent would be, right? I mean, like I don't think I'm having I hear your example there, Judy, but I'm having a hard time putting that in a first half, second half dynamic.
Yeah.
In that, no matter when your kid is in trouble, your kid is in danger, et cetera, your instinct would move you to that. And I don't know if it's even possible to be completely detached from the outcome.
Yeah.
Well, put that scenario into a first half of life context, where the parent is still really worried about appearances, where the child who is going off the rails is, reflecting on them badly as a parent, and maybe them professionally badly. And so now it's all ego driven. And now we're really invested in the outcome. It's not just altruistically about the welfare of my child. It's also about my reputation and my standing in the community. So that would be more of a first half life driving, rather than what you were just describing now, where it's just a mother's heart. That's second half of life. And it would be nice if we could approach everything that way, but it takes some time. It takes some zeros after our age to be able to get there, right?
Yeah, probably so.
Man, just the way it is. You just got to get enough road behind you.
And
Okay,
live
so-
long enough to see it.
Exactly. So he's painting this picture, and then in the next paragraph, he says, this is human life in its crowning, and all else has been preparation and prelude for creating such a human work of art. Now we aid and influence other people simply by being who we are. Human integrity probably influences and moves people from potency to action more than anything else. So that's human integrity probably does this. It always deeply saddens me when old folks are still full of themselves and their absolute opinions about everything. Somehow they have not taken their needed place in the social fabric. We need their deep and steady passions so much more than their superficial and loudly stated principles. We need their peace more than their anger. You know, it's funny because I hear, you know, Marion and I kind of debrief, you know, for her day at Albertsons when she comes home, unless it's really bad and then she doesn't want to talk about it, and I just know, okay, leave it alone. Yeah. Yet last night was like that. I don't want to talk about it. But you know, she talks about these elderly people who come in and they're just nasty and they're mean and they're entitled and, you know, they're screaming about this and about that. And poor Marion's just trying to check their stuff, you know? I mean, it's just like, that's real. And that's why I totally, it always deeply saddens me when old folks are so full of themselves and their absolute opinions about everything, or about their, you know, their little bubble, the egoic bubble that they're still swimming in. It's really sad to see that with people who do have the zeros after their age, but haven't gotten to this place that we're talking about, you know? And they're not even aware of what they're doing. They're so unaware, they don't even see it. You know, it's kind of scandalous and shocking. He says, yes, the second half of life is a certain kind of weight to carry, but no other way of being makes sense or gives you the deep satisfaction your soul now demands and even enjoys. This new and deeper passion is what people mean when they say, I must do this particular thing or my life will not make sense, or it is no longer a choice. Your life and your delivery system are now one, whereas before your life and your occupation seemed like two different things. Your concern is not so much to have what you love anymore, but to love what you have right now. This is a monumental change from the first half of life, so much so that it almost is the litmus test of whether you are in the second half of life at all. Now, he gave me a little bit of pause here, still on the bottom of page 123. This new and deeper passion is what people mean when they say, I must do this particular thing or my life will not make sense, or it is no longer a choice. To me, in the second half of life, even those things must still be relinquished. It becomes a how and not a what. It's not the what of the task that is important to us in the second half of life as much as how we accomplish the task. That there is that integrity that he was talking about at the beginning of the paragraph, that integrity is what really moves people. And so we may be drawn to certain causes or tasks or things to do, but it's still the how that's more important than the what. And even the task itself still needs to be relinquished in that Ecclesiastes sort of way, right? Where everything is meaningless except this moment, and to be immersed in this moment, and to enjoy the work that you're doing while you're doing it, and not about the outcome. Solomon at the end of his life, you know, brings us all full circle and has basically relinquished everything and has come to the conclusion of what really is meaningful in life. And so so that line gave me a little bit of pause because it sounds like still a bit of holding on to first half principles, but I may have misread it or not totally getting what he's saying. Unless he's saying I must do this particular thing or my life will not make sense, and he's really talking about the integrity of how it's going to be done, you know. It's a fine line, but I just thought I'd bring it up because it stopped me for a moment. He continues on 124. The rules are all different now, and we often see it in older folks' freedom to give things away, hoarding, possessing, collecting, and impressing others with their things, their house, or their travels are of less and less interest to them. Inner brightness, still holding life's sadness and joy, is its own reward, its own satisfaction, and their best and truest gift to the world. Such elders are the grandparents of the world. Children and other adults feel so safe and loved around them, and they themselves feel so needed and helpful to children, teens, and midlife adults. And they are. They are in their natural flow. Strangely, all of life's problems, dilemmas, and difficulties are now resolved, not by negativity, attack, criticism, force, or logical resolution, but by always falling into a larger brightness. Hopkins called it the dearest, freshest, deep down things. Gerard Manley Hopkins, the poet, right? The dearest, freshest, deep down things. This is the falling upward that we have been waiting for. One of the guiding principles of our Center for Action and Contemplation puts it this way: the best criticism of the bad is the practice of the better. I learned this from my father, St. Francis, who did not concentrate on attacking evil or others, but just spent his life falling, and falling many times into the good, the true, and the beautiful. It was the only way he knew how to fall into God. Such inner brightness ends up being a much better and longer lasting alternative to evil than any war, anger, violence, or ideology could ever be. All you have to do is meet one such shining person, and you know that he or she is surely the goal of humanity and the delight of God. I hope you are becoming that shining person yourself, and that this book is helping you see it, allow it, and trust it. Otherwise, this book too will be just some more words, instead of words becoming flesh. Until it becomes flesh, it cannot shine and shine brightly. You know, in talking about this caricature of this person, this second half of life person, this kingdom person, right? I was thinking of that woman that I was talking about the last few Sundays. She's a Chalk employee that I've been counseling. And she was telling me about her mother-in-law. You remember this one? Her mother-in-law who moved with her father-in-law to Las Vegas to retire. And they lived there 7 years, and then she died. And when the woman I was counseling went out to the memorial service, to the funeral, she was just shocked at how many people were there at this funeral. I mean, the woman was there 7 years, but 7 years, you know, it's not like a lifetime or anything. And in a city the size of Las Vegas, you know, she made such an impact with everybody from, you know, food service workers to checkout clerks. I mean, they were all there at this memorial service, and, you know, just hundreds of people. She had made such an impact on everybody that she was around, just living her life, going to the store, going to restaurants, doing what she did. And then the same woman I talked to just last week, and she had just come back from Washington State. Her sister died unexpectedly up in Washington State, had just moved there, lived there under a year, had bought her first house because her life had been pretty difficult with a divorce that kind of left her destitute, and moved up there. And she got involved in this church that was kind of a meditation church. It was kind of more Buddhist in flavor, although it wasn't actually Buddhist. And again, she said there was this huge gathering of people, and they were so devoted to her. And the memorial service that they planned was just so heartfelt and so wonderful. And here in under a year, she had landed with both feet and created this community, or become part of this community in such a way that she was deeply connected. And she was just living her life. I think that's the kind of stuff that he's talking about here. When we get into second half, we're not so much planning stuff and trying to make things happen as we're just being who we are. And it has this huge effect on people. And that's where we really want to be. All right. No, normally we would say, this is a great place to stop so we can start next time right on a chapter head. But not tonight. We're going to press on. Any comments about that last chapter, though, before we do?
Yeah, just, I was noticing that, I was at Sam's Club yesterday, and most of us, were in these long lines, but the people that were probably senior citizens like myself, we just struck up conversations with each other. And basically, as we had to wait, to move through the line, and what it felt like to me was that, yeah, as a senior, we don't see, things don't press upon us as much. And I kind of felt like what we were reading earlier in that last paragraphs, that it kind of mirrored that for me, and it was nice. Nobody had ego like you talk about. And I understand it, people coming through those hardware places, and poor Marion's getting, bombarded with negativity. But it's really interesting. That wasn't going on with all of these seniors at Sam's Club.
Send them all over to Albertsons in Central Street.
Yeah. Or yeah, I said hardware store. I meant Albertsons, but yeah. But no, I thought that was very interesting because it wasn't stressing me out at all. And that was a good thing, the things that usually stressed me, it wasn't stressing. But then I kind of saw this neat, kind of just a neat being about these people, it's like life, huh? I've seen it all. I don't have to worry about it, that kind of thing.
That's the freedom of old age that a lot of people talk about, you don't have to really worry about what you look like anymore. You don't have to worry about impressing anybody. You don't have to worry about trying to grease palms or get ahead. Just there you are. That freedom to just be unselfconsciously is something that we don't have in the first half of life. That's for sure. My gosh. You look at these poor high school kids, these adolescents, and everything they're going through, and it's all heightened now because of social media and the pressure that's put on them to look a certain way and be a certain way. And my gosh, talk about hyper self-consciousness and worrying about appearances and performance and trying to be an influencer and all this kind of stuff. I mean, it's just crushing.
Like in Southern California, Orange County, there's such a demand. What I noticed here is that there, people are very, very aware of what their uniform is. Just how cool they look, or progressive, or whatever, to go with their Mercedes. Newport's the Mercedes capital of the world, but here in Santa Fe, it's like, yeah, it's people are just so casual compared to what most of Orange County's like, and it's really neat because nobody cares what anybody looks like, but most of the people are kind of a very eclectic, kind of a cool look, but yeah, a lot of people don't really care about all that. Your car doesn't have to be shiny because the weather changes so rapidly here. You don't care whether your Mercedes is real shiny, or whatever.
Okay, well then let's shift gears into chapter 11, where now he's going to talk about the Shadowlands. All right, so yes, that's the bright side. Now let's start to look at the shadow side. Got a couple of epigraphs here. A light shines in the darkness, a light that darkness cannot overcome. That's the prologue to John's Gospel. And then from Matthew 5, make friends with your opponent quickly while he is taking you to court, or he will hand you over to the judge, and the judge to the officer, and the officer will throw you into prison. You will not get out until you have paid the last penny. Despite the joys of such brightness that we've been talking about, right? We must also talk more about the paradoxical journey of getting there. By the second half of life, you have been in regular unwelcome contact with your shadow self, which gradually detaches you from your not so bright persona, meaning stage mask in Greek, that you so diligently constructed in the first half of life. Your stage mask is not bad, evil, or necessarily egocentric. It is just not true. It is manufactured and sustained unconsciously by your mind. But it can and will die, as all fictions must die. Persona and shadow are correlative terms. Your shadow is what you refuse to see about yourself, and what you do not want others to see. Let me read that again when I got a decent page term. Persona and shadow are correlative terms. Your shadow is what you refuse to see about yourself, and what you do not want others to see. The more you have cultivated and protected a chosen persona, the more shadow work you will need to do. Be especially careful, therefore, of any idealized role or self-image, like that of a minister, mother, doctor, nice person, professor, moral believer, or president of this or that. These are huge personas to live up to, and they trap many people in lifelong delusion. The more you are attached to and unaware of such a protected self-image, the more shadow self you will very likely have. That's an interesting statement, right? The more you're attached to and unaware of a protected self-image, the more shadow self you will very likely have. Why do you think that would be? The more you're attached to and unaware of such a protected self-image, the more shadow self you will very likely have.
Trying really hard to not show themselves.
Yeah, you're going in the right direction, Linda. If we're trying so hard to maintain this persona and putting all of our energy and investment in that bright, shiny face that we're showing everybody, this role that we play, then that means we're not spending any energy or any time looking at the shadow side and dealing with the shadow side and exercising the shadow side. Remember the book that we read? What was that? The shadow, I can't remember the title.
Owning your own shadow.
Owning your own shadow. Remember, he talked about this. To the extent that we don't exercise, we don't give vent to, we don't allow the shadow side to be even ritually exercised, then it builds up inside of us. And it's going to explode at some point. You know, it's got to come out eventually. So the more that you've been so focused on maintaining the persona, the less that you've been dealing with the shadow side. Therefore, the more that you've got built up. You know, he was even talking about the liturgy of the Catholic Mass as being a ritualistic exercising of the shadow side. And he said the beauty of it is that the unconscious doesn't know the difference between a symbol and the real thing, right? They both work equally well in being able to play through and let the shadow side work. But if we're putting all of our eggs in the light basket and we're not dealing with the shadow side, now it's building up. So that's, I think, what he's talking about here. The more attached to and unaware of such a protected self-image, the more shadow self you will very likely have. Conversely, the more you live out of your shadow self, the less capable you are of recognizing the persona you are trying to protect and project. Now, this one was a little harder for me to parse, but I think what he's saying here is the more you live out of your shadow self, in other words, the more that you unconsciously give vent to your shadow self. This isn't the positive working out of shadow that we were talking about either in ritualistic terms or other ways. This is the grumpy person who just yells at Marion in the checkout line, you know. This is the person who is unconsciously, you know, letting the shadow just run amok. So the more you live out of your shadow self, the less capable you are of recognizing the persona you're trying to project and protect. You lose that persona. You're not even aware that you're losing the persona. You know, these people aren't aware of how hateful they're being or the effect that they're having on Marion, who as an empath standing there 8 hours, you know, collecting all of these negative vibes just really affects her. They're completely unaware. They don't even see the way that they're coming across. So I think that's what he's talking about here. This isn't a healthy way of being able to exercise the shadow side. This is just abusing other people because you're not even aware of what you're doing. So this is Jesus right from the cross. Forgive them, Father. They don't know what they're doing.
Dave, when you use the word exercise, I'm confused as to whether you're saying EXERCISE or EXORCISE.
I was doing a double entendre. Wasn't that cool of me?
I was trying to keep up with you. I wasn't sure if I was quite.
You know, it really, yeah, I was thinking about that as I was saying it, and my pronunciation was kind of in the middle. But it's really both. We need to exercise the shadow side, you know, and we can remember he talked about doing that by shouting into a pillow, you know, and some silly things that you can do to get that energy through and out. You know, that the gruesome images in the Catholic Mass and symbolism was another way of exercising and exorcising the shadow self. So we're getting it out of us. It's playing through us in hopefully a ritualistic or a symbolic way, so it doesn't hurt anybody, because we don't want that to happen. But it's really a bit of both. We need to exercise it so that we can exorcise it. Is basically how it sort of works out. Yeah. But if we do neither, right, then it's like a double blindness to keep you from seeing and being your best and deepest self. As Jesus put it, if the lamp within you is in fact darkness, what darkness there will be. There is no self-awareness. There is no awareness of what's going on. Therefore, no ability to actually channel these energies in a way that continues to move us toward the light and continues to allow us to be people who can lead people better than we found them.
I lost my place, Dave. What page? What
128.
paragraph? Okay, I am there.
128.
128, right in the middle of the page.
Yes.
This is where he gets a little personal here. He says, I have prayed for years for one good humiliation a day. I like that. And then I must watch my reaction to it. In my position, I have no other way of spotting both my well-denied shadow self, and my idealized persona. That's a really good insight, right? In his position. Now you got to think, in his position, everybody's kissing his butt, right? Everybody is always complimentary.
Right.
Everybody is always, you know, and after a while, you can believe your own press. That's what happens to these celebrities all the time, right? So in his position, and if he doesn't get one good humiliation a day, he has no other way of spotting both my well-denied shadow self, the one that he has put down in terms of his public persona, or my idealized persona. I am actually surprised there are not more clergy scandals, because spiritual leader or professional religious person is such a dangerous and ego-inflating self-image. I read that line and I thought, well, I think there's enough though, don't you, of these scandals? Maybe he's surprised that there should be more, but I think there's enough. I mean, just recently, a couple more pastors went down, you know, and with these scandals and all this stuff. He says, whenever ministers, I'm sorry, go ahead.
You know that example that you shared not too long ago about when Doug and Nina went to his 5-day retreat thing that he did up with the Center for Action, and they were really kind of surprised and put off by his politicizing or his sharing his political views, I think, if I remember correctly.
Yeah,
I'm not sure if I got that right. I wonder if they had chosen to have a sidebar discussion with him, do you think that he would have considered that part of his breaking through his idealized persona of himself?
His humiliation for the day?
Yeah, his humiliation for the day, exactly.
Yeah, maybe it would have, you know, and obviously it wasn't just him, it was according to Nina and Doug, you know, they said basically that was just the tone of the whole thing. And of course, it was right at the height of you know, Trump hysteria and all of that. So it was a heightened time.
Yeah.
But still, it surprised me. You know, I mean, it probably shouldn't. People are just people, whether they're Richard Rohr or anybody else. But it did surprise me that that came through to the degree that it was really felt by Doug and Nina that way. Uh, but yeah, it's a blindness. It's a blind side. We all have our blind sides. And, he probably had it well justified in his mind, about, the rightness of his stance and this and that. But for some of the people there, at least it seemed inappropriate.
Yeah.
So yeah, if they had approached him, maybe that could have been his humiliation for the day. And then it would have been interesting to see his reaction to it. Would he have gotten defensive? Would he have tried to justify it? Or would he have taken it gracefully and listened to what they had to say and considered it? On a good day, he would have done the latter.
Yeah.
But we don't always have good days, do we?
Right.
No matter who we
Exactly.
are.
That's so true.
Yeah.
Dave, what some of this is making me think of is this earlier conversation we had a few weeks ago about this idea that, it's not a virtue, unless we earn it, basically. The idea that, if you're a naturally a nonviolent person, for example, and you're just a passive human being that didn't hurt a fly, then it's not a virtue for you to be nonviolent. It's just how you show up, rather than compared to the person who is capable of violence but keeps it in check. And it's making me think of this idea of knowing your shadow and embracing your shadow in that way, so that real conflict, internal conflict and struggle can actually exist, where you're choosing to do the right thing while the impulse to maybe do less than is there.
That's a great point, William. And if you think about the way the Hebrews envisioned Satan, that Satan was basically God's employee. He was the one who made our choices real. Okay, great. You got free will, but if you don't really have a choice, what good is your free will, right? But Satan is the one who is giving us the alternative, giving us the choice, so that our free will is actually tested and we know that it's real. And that's kind of what you're saying, is that when we really get into our shadow side, then we're realizing our choices are real. Even if our proclivities, even if our kind of innate persona or personality is toward maybe gentleness and meekness and peacefulness, we still have a choice to make, right? It may not be as dramatic in certain areas as other people, but we all have a choice to make. And the shadow side is that that Hasatan, that adversary, right? The one who is giving us the other side of the equation. Hey, I hear that. Okay, so he says, whenever ministers or any true believers are too anti-anything, you can be pretty sure there is some shadow material lurking somewhere nearby. Now that kind of speaks to what we were just talking about with Rohr and his political stuff, right? I wonder if he was aware of that at the time, that when he was too anti this stuff, whatever it was, right-wing politics or whatever, that there was a lot of shadow material lurking somewhere nearby. Your persona is what most people want from you and reward you for, and what you choose to identify with for some reason. As you do your inner work, you will begin to know that your self-image is nothing more than just that, and not worth protecting, promoting, or denying. As Jesus says in the passage above, if you can begin to make friends with those who have a challenging message for you, you will usually begin to see some of your own shadow. If you don't, you will miss out on much needed wisdom and end up imprisoned within yourself or taken to court by others. And you will undoubtedly have to pay the last penny to reorder your life and your relationships. Think of our many politicians and clergy who have fallen into public disgrace following sexual and financial scandals. So he's really taking that passage. We were just talking on Sunday about doing a midrash on Genesis, doing the search and finding ways that this story, this passage, this ancient passage applies to daily life. Well, he's certainly doing a midrash there, Jesus is talking about the court system. Hey, if someone's taking you to court as you're walking on the way, hey, talk to him, settle the deal, so that you don't have to go to court. Because if you go to court, then you're going to end up having to pay the last penny. So he's taking this and taking it totally into a different context, taking it into the interior, personal, and second half of life journey, which is kind of a cool way to render it if you think about it. The opponent taking you to court is, for me, a telling description of what we allow inner storylines to do to us. In 10 seconds, we can create an entire and self-justifying scenario of blame, anger, and hurt toward ourselves or toward another. Jesus is saying, don't go there, or the judge, officer, and courtroom will quickly take over and have their way with you. Buddhist nun and writer Pema Chodron says that once you create a self-justifying storyline, your emotional entrapment within it quadruples. She is surely right. Yet I still do it every day and become my own worst judge, attorney, and jury within 10 seconds of an offending statement. Your self-image is not substantial or lasting. It is just created out of your own mind, desire, and choice, and everybody else's preferences for you. It floats around in Plato's unreal world of ideas. It is not objective at all, but entirely subjective, which does not mean that it does not have real influence. The movement to second half of life wisdom has much to do with necessary shadow work and the emergence of healthy self-critical thinking, which alone allows you to see beyond your own shadow and disguise and to find who you are hidden with Christ in God, as Paul puts it. The Zen masters call it the face you had before you were born. This self cannot die and always lives and is your true self. Now, I've been talking about this in terms of vanquishing the ego, but it's basically the same thing. Doing the shadow work, the emergence of healthy self-critical thinking, which alone allows you to see beyond your own shadow and disguise to find out who you are, hidden with Christ in God. Basically, to unidentify with the ego, to realize that the ego is not all there is, to expand beyond the bubble, the self-referential bubble that the ego creates around our heads, and to break through that and really connect with others. One more paragraph. As Jesus puts it, you must recognize the plank in your own eye, and only then will you see clearly enough to take the splitter out of your brother's or sister's eye. He also said the lamp of the body is the eye. The spiritual maturity is largely a growth in seeing, and full seeing seems to take most of our lifetime, with a huge leap in the final years, months, weeks, and days of life, as any hospice volunteer will tell you. There seems to be a cumulative and exponential growth in seeing in people's last years for those who do their inner work. There is also a cumulative closing down in people who have denied all shadow work and humiliating self-knowledge. Watch the Nuremberg trials and see Nazi men who killed millions still in total denial and maintenance of their moral self-image till the very end. I'm sure you all know examples of both these types.
We sure do.
Yeah.
Sorry.
What are you laughing about, buddy?
Oh, I was just trying to apply that last sentence to what's going on with people in power or who had been in power, still in power.
Okay. So we will.
I'm sorry. I just meant to say that there seems to be a lot of that denial going on, or so maybe some of our politicians don't reflect on themselves, but rather, have total denial.
There's a lot of that going around right now, but there always has been, Nothing's really changed.
You said that. I've heard you say that a few times.
Well, Solomon said it, there's nothing new under the sun, and there isn't.
Oh,
The only thing that changes is technology. Otherwise, people are people, always the same. We do the same things.
I don't know. It
We have
seems like
greater reach now, and we can be more destructive
Mhm,
because of technology, but the same impulses are still there.
mhm. But it seems like we're reaching new heights. That may not be true, but to what you're saying, but it does kind of seem like we're hitting new heights.
I think we only are because of the technology, because we're a global community now, because the things that people do don't have regional consequences anymore. They now have global consequences. And
Yeah.
that we're seeing it 24/7 all day long, in our phones and it's just ubiquitous.
Right.
But I don't know that human nature has changed much. I think the reach has changed us. And I think the general unhealthiness of our society is also creating more unhealthy people. So maybe there's more of them who are less balanced. And I mean, what was this 2 mass shootings in 2 days now? I mean, it's getting off the hook, the kind of things that are taking place in our society.
Where was that?
So
Where was
Yes.
it?
I can't hear you, Linda.
Oh, where was that you were just talking about?
I was a Walmart back east someplace. Someone shot up, and before that, it was a LGBTQ bar. It was shot up the day before, or a couple of days before. But it's just becoming more and more and more. So it's
Sad.
a dysfunctional society and milieu is going to produce more and more unbalanced people. It's
They need that day of humility.
yeah.
Patient.
Yeah, these folks aren't leaders. They're just lost. They're so lost. Yeah. So anyways, on that cheerful note, so we'll pick this up next week. So that'll be the 30th, right? The 30th of November is next Wednesday. So we'll pick it up there, and we'll still be talking about Shadowlands. So
Okay.
yeah. Any last comments before we turn it over to Scott?
Take her away.
All right. Okay, Scott, you're on, buddy.
Lord, thanks for meeting with us as you always do. Thanks for giving us the hunger and the thirst and the desire to gain wisdom and seek out knowledge. And don't want to sound like the opening to Star Trek, Lord, but boldly go where no man has gone before. We want to find out the things we don't know, Lord, and help us to figure out this second half of life journey, to live in concert with it and not rage against the machine, so to speak. Help us to know the rights, the wrongs, the ins, the outs, the ups and downs, the beauty of your ways and your love. Thank you for being the prime example of how we should be. No questions to ask. We just simply look at you and we've got our answers, Lord. Thank you for blessing us with health, with family, loved ones. We pray for those people who feel a sense of connection or lost a connection on this Thanksgiving, and we will fill their lives with a direct connection with you and with friends and family. Maybe they weren't expecting to reach out and contact them. Thank you for loving us the way you do. It's in your precious and holy name, Lord Jesus, we pray and give our thanks and say our amens. Amen.
Amen.
And
Everybody,
Good night.
thank you so much for being here. Just the 7 of us. We had a good conversation tonight. So
not bad.
not bad. Yeah, so we did all right. So thanks for being here and keeping the flame burning and being good bitter enders.
Happy Thanksgiving, everybody.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Good night, everybody.
Happy
Got to get my
Thanksgiving.
dogs
Thanks
out.
for all of us.
Thanksgiving.
Absolutely.
Bye.
See you
Have a
Sunday.
wonderful Thanksgiving.
All
Good night,
right.
guys.
You too.
And yours. All
Bye-bye.
right.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Good night. Good night. Good night.
Good night. See you
And
guys
good
on
night,
Sunday.
Good night. Have a great Thanksgiving and see you. I won't see you Saturday, but I'll see you Sunday.
Okay.
Oh,
See you guys. See you on Sunday. See you
All
on
right.
Sunday, Linda.
Bye-bye.